Well, here I am again. This is George DeVores reading another chapter, chapter 5, The Delicate Question of Mental Health, from my little book, Getting It, 8 Facts That Fuel Recovery if We Face Them. And I'll show you the illustration for this chapter, also taken from the first book, White Knuckles and Wishful Thinking. And the quote under it is, quote, "We call this plain insanity." That's on page 37 of the AA Big Book. Anyway, let me commence. The delicate question of mental health. Enough with word pictures. That was the last chapter. This chapter will mostly tell stories. One from my career on the psych wards, a couple from the Big Book itself, and 3 I have gathered from 12-step speakers since 1972. These 3 stories lit up my own understanding of addiction so vividly, I've never forgotten them. That's the 3 stories from the meetings. So let's start with schizophrenic Richard. It's the same story I share in the workbook, Getting It. But like I said, I am old and I have earned the right to repeat myself. Richard was an inpatient on our psych unit back in 71 or 72. We were told later that he had formed a delusion that he was a bird. Harmless enough, right? Until he decided to act on his innocent belief. You see, while our windows awaited the new bars that had been ordered, Richard saw his chance to fly. And fly he did. But the concrete 20 feet below had a different idea. Compound fractures of the neck and spine, several days in the intensive care unit, death. Tell me, what is the difference between Richard believing he is a bird and trying to fly, and any alcoholic, addict, whatever, believing that he or she can control whatever he or she craves? That this time will be different. That just one certainly won't hurt. That I can handle it now. Okay, there are differences. Richard had no prior experience in this lifetime of being a bird. Maybe you used to be a social drinker or recreational user. Maybe you had a good time in the beginning, many times. Maybe you still do it, except when you don't. To quote Maxwell Smart from the old Get Smart TV series, quote, "Everyone's entitled to one fatal mistake." So Richard could probably not escape his delusion by abstaining from it one day at a time, by calling his Psychotic Delusions Anonymous sponsor, or by having a spiritual experience. For reasons known only to the gods of the psyche, addictive delusion can be interrupted, at least temporarily. It can be delayed from coming back by the action of the deluded. True, the process often depends on outside help to do the inside job. But this is the life-saving difference between a disorder of thought, schizophrenic Richard, and a disorder of desire, which is to say addiction, which might be you. Are you satisfied with my admitting the difference between Richard and you? If you are, and you are willing, go back and spend some time with the similarities between you and Richard. Maybe write them down. Share them even. And don't leave out your feelings about them, like the ones that got triggered the minute I read the example. Or forget to tune in to what others feel about poor Richard and the poor addict, alcoholic, whatever. You get this, and you've got a real chance. Richard was one of my most important teachers, as important as Lieutenant X. May your heart receive what his story would share. What is insanity, after all? Sure, we can yak about cultural differences and moral judgments. Common sense says that a crazy person's mind is so far out of reality that his or her actions just make no sense. not to someone who assumes he or she is living in reality himself or herself. Alcoholic drinking makes no sense to a social drinker or teetotaler. Why would you do that? Why on earth would you pay that price? Why don't you stop, for heaven's sake? Why did you start again? The recreational or non-drug user looks at the addict with similar questions. You stole from your family? You had sex for drugs? You left your child where? For how long? Our self-destructive behavior makes no sense to the person who is not controlled by those particular cravings. Just don't ask them about their cravings. For money, status, power, approval, certainty, control, or being right, just to name a few. As an aside, which is not in the book, I've had a number of clients where I was able to tell them that their codependent wife was more addicted to being right than they had ever been to heroin. Anyway, I finished that last section and almost immediately had an oh shit moment. I realized I can't talk about addictive insanity and leave out the effort relapse. This section of the book is still about wishful thinking. For starters, I have been doing a treatment exercise about it for years. The group brainstorms what they actually meant by effort as they picked up the first drink, drug, whatever. Only once in all those years have I heard this from a participant. What I really meant by effort at that moment was F reality. What everyone else says is, I check out, or I run from my problems, or I just couldn't deal with it, and it is this monster called reality. How crazy is that? I mean, how does anyone F reality? And where is it we think we are running to anyway? Another thing about this effort relapse, besides the futile rejection of reality itself, the unrepentant refusal to accept something as it is. We say F it when we are upset. And whatever we are upset about, we have decided it is completely intolerable and definitely unjustifiable. There is no way to make it right. Then the only reasonable thing left is to get what relief we can. We don't have a clue that our suffering is mostly caused by our own resistance, the part of us that says F it. By the way, that exercise was published a number of years ago in Counselor Magazine. It's also on my website for free. You can print it out. And it's a description of actually doing it. It's not just the instructions for the exercise. Back to the book. That acceptance or surrender or non-resistance or relaxation or stillness really is the answer. You know what? I need to read this again. We don't have a clue that our suffering is mostly caused by our own resistance. That acceptance or surrender or non-resistance or relaxation or stillness, or I could add, which I didn't in the book, saying yes to what is, really is the answer. No, these people, places, and things are to be managed for our personal happiness. And when they fail to do their job, they are to blame for whatever we must do to seek relief. You could say that sanity is the ability to face facts and make realistic decisions based on those facts. It's kind of hard to do that if you reject the facts you don't like. So much for the insanity of saying F it and picking up the first whatever. Now maybe I can get to the AA 12 Steps take on insanity. Here's one I heard at the Ohio Street AA meeting in LA in the early 80s. A speaker shared about one of his A speaker sharing, let me try that again. Here's one I heard at the Ohio Street meeting in LA in the early 80s, I think. A speaker shared about one of his arrests. When busted, he was in the middle of the street with a bucket of paint and a brush, laying down the lines between his motel and the liquor store across the street. It had become inconvenient for a man in his condition to toddle all the way to the nearest crosswalk. The audience laughed, of course. So much of the humor in any 12-step meeting mocks the shared insanity of addiction. We all have it. That's why we're laughing. It is the laughter of identification and releases the secret power of meetings. Well, actually, one secret power. The feeling of us. I think this particular story stays with me because the solution was so present-minded and simple. Like Solomon proposing equal division of the baby. What could be more outside the box and in the now? A little too present-minded for the arresting officer, I guess. A little too focused on personal need, perhaps, and blissfully oblivious to the needs of others. But still, freaking brilliant. I love this story, and I pass it on for your reading pleasure. However, these kind of hijinks are not what the big book calls plain insanity. For that, check out the proverbial whiskey and milk story in chapter 3 of that book. You know, the one where the would-be recovering alcoholic decides it is okay to drink. How could a little whiskey in his milk hurt anything? After all, he reasoned, he had a full stomach, too. What could possibly go wrong? Nothing much. Only enough to land back on the psych ward, not someplace you wanted to be in the 1930s. And then the big book says, we call this plain insanity. How can such a loss of proportion of the ability to think straight be called anything else? And just to be clear, this type of thinking has been characteristic of every single one of us. Every single one. Here's the point about the AA point. The plain insanity from which step 2 promises relief is a type of thinking. And it is a sort of thinking found precisely at the moment of picking up the first drink or drug or whatever of relapse, of deciding to return to the, quote, bottom line behavior, unquote, of any addiction. Earlier in that same chapter, you find the businessman with 25 years abstinence. He falls for a similar wishful belief, what the big book calls the casual relapse. Not to stop there, the story of Fred's relapse follows Jim and his dairy brew, and Fred repeats this thinking when deciding to order up a disaster. A cocktail would be nice with dinner. One harmless drink. One harmless bowl, wine, score, chocolate, bet, or peak. Why not? Immediately after the whiskey and milk story comes a sly paragraph about a different kind of relapse. The times when, quote, we have gone out deliberately to get drunk, feeling ourselves justified by nervousness, anger, worry, depression, and so on. They've done a nice job of describing the effort relapse without confessing to the naughty language. But the authors have nothing more to say about this different sort of relapse at that point in the book. No examples, no tools or observations, except one. The founders of 12-step recovery are emphatically clear that both kinds of relapse blind the drinker to, quote, whatever the terrific consequences might be, unquote. He or she might just as well be cruising at 90 in a blindfold. A type of thinking that accompanies the first drink. Just how important was that almost universal experience in the original AA understanding of alcoholism and relapse? In laying a foundation for the tasks and tools of all 12-step recovery, not just alcoholics. Let me offer 3 sentences from the big book, not necessarily in the order of appearance. 1. Show him the mental twist that leads to the first drink of a spree. That's on page 92 about working with newcomers. Next, we shall describe some of the mental states that precede a relapse into drinking. For obviously, this is the crux of the problem. What sort of thinking dominates an alcoholic who repeats time after time the desperate experiment of the first drink? That's on page 34. And lastly here, these observations would be academic and pointless if our friend never took the first drink, thereby setting the terrible cycle in motion. Therefore, the main problem of the alcoholic, or any addict, centers in his mind rather than in his body. That's on page 23. So the main problem, the crux of the problem, dominates. Oh, and be sure to talk about that mental twist when you are sharing the program with someone new. The main problem of the alcoholic and the main focus for the solution called 12-step recovery is a sort of thinking. Two sorts, actually. Wishful, what I call wishful, one won't hurt and the like, and expletive, effort and the like. This is true whatever addiction you may be trying to face or to avoid. So what do people in recovery who have faced their own insanity say? Subtle things like, my disease is out to kill me. My mind is a dangerous place. I don't go in there alone. Every day I wake up with untreated alcoholism, addiction, whatever. I never trust my first thought about anything. My best thinking got me here. People who don't get this about themselves may say, it is just a bad habit. I need to cut back. I'm okay, fine, normal, as long as I don't drink, drug, whatever. Others need to change, and then I wouldn't need to drink, drug, or whatever I do. I believe in willpower. Drinking is a conscious decision. I can do anything I set my mind to. I know I can't drink or drug or whatever, so I just won't. Before we go further, I have to say something about one of the beliefs above. For anyone who thinks that his or her decision to pick up that first drink, drug, whatever was, quote, conscious, unquote, I assume your idea of conscious includes being aware of what's going on. However, the person falling for wishful thinking is not connected in that moment to his or her past experience. Most do not feel a craving or any sense of burning need, even though nothing but overwhelming desire can take over a mind that way and usually get it to believe that down is up. Consequences? What consequences? And many wishful thinkers are triggered by pain they have buried or blocked out. In other words, they're not conscious of it. They do not feel it, not at that moment. Instead of feeling it, a mysterious urge for a painkiller seems to come. Out of the blue, my granny's fanny. Yes, they are conscious of taking their drink, drug, whatever, but I have never worked with a wishful thinker. But I have never worked with wishful thinkers who were aware of what actually controlled the decision. The expletive relapse? The people saying F it are oblivious to real consequences. We will see in a bit that they have lost track of what they really care about, and they have lost sight of all the things you can do instead of using whatever they use. If you are not conscious of your options, how can you be claimed to be conscious at all? Your reality folder displays a menu of one. I'll come back to that in the last chapter. Let me end this section with the most brilliant example of addictive insanity I can remember. It does not involve the first drink, drug, whatever, but it does reveal the utter domination of craving over thought, and it only involves nicotine addiction. So, the speaker had some medical background, and recognized he was having a heart attack. Not good. He called 911 and went out on his balcony for a cigarette. Well, just that is crazy enough. Then he hears the sirens and realizes help is almost here. His first thought, shit, I won't be able to finish my cigarette. Everyone in the room laughed. Everyone got it because everyone had lived it. As the story and the latest brain science show, your addiction does not give a shit. Not about the rest of your brain, or your heart, or lungs, or job, or marriage, or morals, or happiness. Your body is there for it to use, to satisfy its craving, and for no other purpose. Your other values are obstacles to be overpowered or duped. Enough about mental health. Time to talk about recovery, especially the direct connection from problem to solution. If you see the memory problem in yourself, it is not hard to see that meetings remind us why we quit, which is why we are not starting again. At a very practical level, this makes meetings a kind of higher power, something that can do for the individual what the individual seems unable to do for him or herself. Remember, this directly prevents relapse by the insanity of wishful thinking. What about relieving your own emotional insanity? Well, most people find they can go to a meeting upset and emerge an hour later calm. The urge to say F it and grab a fix usually goes down. At a practical level, they have been restored to sanity by something greater than themselves, a group of fellow lunatics. Over time, they will get similar results from using tools for acceptance and surrender, for being restored from madness to calmness, calling a sponsor, slogans, working steps, prayer and meditation, and so on. Better yet, many of these tools nurture a growing level of serenity. The madness can't even get started. The dance between sanity and recovery. One of the people I respect most in the field said something relevant a while back. He was struggling with severe pain at the time and had to take painkillers. He spoke with an honesty found in 12-step meetings and darned few places otherwise. And he named his fear, quote, losing control of my recovery, unquote. In other words, people who get the insanity of their addictive thinking know they live in a window of opportunity. Do what needs to be done today, and it stays open. The insane thinking cannot take control. Slack off on the work long enough, or subject the brain to a physical trigger, and that window closes. The thoughts come back. I wasn't that bad. This drug, whatever, never got me in trouble. Or the old standby when things go wrong. F it. We believe our addictive thoughts and then act on them. And our ability to use the tools that kept the window open is gone. We have lost control of our recovery. Well, that's the end of the chapter. How about that? Time to sign off, and thank you for watching or listening, or both. And I hope this was of some use to you. Bye.